Welcome to this webinar on performance-related injury delivered by the ISM Trust. I'm Charlotte Tomlinson. I'm a performance coach and I work with musicians to help them clear any blocks that might be preventing them from performing at their peak. Before we begin, a few technical points. You can't see me, but you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. You should also be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the questions box and I'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. So what is performance-related injury? An injury or pain that comes as a result of something connected to learning or playing your instrument. It could be something like tendonitis, which is basically inflamed tendons, and usually for an instrumentalist it'll be in your hands, wrists or arms. Could be nodules on vocal cords if you're a singer. Could be some kind of issue around your embouchure if you're a woodwind or brass player. I would say usually performance-related injuries are chronic. They usually develop over time. It's rare that they're acute. So today we're going to look at the importance of taking performance-related injuries seriously. We're going to consider the possible causes, and we're going to look at ways to overcome an injury, but most importantly, we're going to look at how to prevent it. How does pain build up? What's really interesting about this is it's very easy for musicians not to notice pain building up. And it's easy to, or you can notice the physical problem but push it to one side. This happens a lot. Why is it? Well, generally, if you talk to a musician who's got some kind of aches and pains, there'll be a lot of pressures around it. There'll be the anxiety about not being able to do concerts or fulfill commitments. There'll be a very real fear of losing work or being seen to be unreliable. Or sometimes people feel that they're just not going to be seen as a good enough musician if they own up to having an injury. Then there are more sort of personal and internal pressures. Some musicians just simply don't want to stop playing, don't want to miss out. They don't want to let people down. And I even remember a student of mine saying that she didn't want to stop playing because of an injury, because she didn't want to get bored. It's tough for any musician to acknowledge that something's not quite right. And it's even tougher when you're professional and your livelihood is at stake. It's important, though, to acknowledge what's going on and realize that you're not a failure if you have pain when you play. Can we afford to ignore it? Think about this for a second. If you have a light flashing up on the dashboard of your car, it's basically showing that there's a problem. If you ignore it, the car could break down and you actually risk putting your life or other people's lives at stake. Pain is the same as the light on the dashboard. It's an indicator, it's a warning, and it shows that something's wrong or out of balance. It gets worse without attention, so it really is important to take notice and not ignore it. You've probably heard the motto, no pain, no gain. It's very much an old school way of talking, and that is for sure is changing. But sometimes that motto finds its way back in again, and it really is very important not to consider it as something to take notice of. It's not helpful to think about no pain, no gain. Pushing through pain just aggravates it. So if you have aches and pains, there is hope, because if you catch it early, you can get to the root of it and turn it around. And sometimes you can even come out of it better than you were before. An injury or aches and pains can force you to dig deep to find out where the causes are. How do we dig deep and find out what this injury is all about? Well, I would suggest starting from the surface and starting from the physical manifestation of the pain. It might be something fairly superficial and just physical, or it may have a much deeper root and be a longer term issue. You might find that you need outside help to find out what's causing the problem, and it may not be a quick fix issue. So let's look at some of the possible causes of pain and injury. I'm going to start off with what I call misuse and overuse. Often musicians will say, well, I've just got some aches and pains, or something's gone wrong. I've just been practicing for too long, practicing way too much. And I think that's what the problem is. And of course it could be, but there's also the other side, which is there could be a little bit of something not quite right, perhaps a little bit of your technique that might not be working well, or something's just not quite in alignment. If you practice for long hours on its own, then you shouldn't actually have problems. You should, if all is working well, be able to practice for many hours in a day and be okay. If you have something slightly wrong with your technique, or something's out of alignment, sort of generally, it won't cause a problem if you're not practicing very much. But if you put misuse and overuse together, that will cause problems. So something a little bit wrong with your technique plus long hours will really start causing a few problems. Then there's something other than the instrument. If you think about things like, for example, if you've got some aches and pains, have you been recently holding your bag on a different shoulder, or is it more heavy than normal? Are you clenching your arms when you're driving on the steering wheel? Are you gripping your mobile phone when you're actually ringing somebody? Or, as this lovely man is demonstrating here, are you crouched over the computer, causing yourself all sorts of stiffness in your shoulders and all sorts of other things? Sitting, actually, since we're on that, sitting at a computer is a really important one. And I've often seen pianists come to me who don't have any problems wrong with their playing or technique at all. But when I take them to a desk and sit them at a laptop and check how they sit at a computer, they show me all sorts of crazy things that they would never do if they were sitting at the piano. So it's very important to see whether something else is contributing to your playing of the instrument. The other thing is that if you have just been doing something new, so let's say you have a standard kind of number of hours of practice you do every day, and nothing's really changed for quite a long time, but you've suddenly started going to the gym, or you've taken up a sport, or you've started yoga for the first time, you may find that something else can contribute to a sort of little niggle that might be underlying in your playing of your instrument that otherwise wouldn't notice. Now we get on to the psychological and emotional causes, and the external pressure to be of a certain standard in musicians can lead to a fear of failure, and this can trigger physical tension. Let me tell you a little story about this. I had a student that I was teaching, a piano student, who I wanted to get across a very free wrist movement, and he couldn't get it. Highly intelligent guy, very good pianist, but he could not get it. So after a while, I got him to do the movement away from the piano, and he had absolutely no problems whatsoever. But when we went back to the piano, the problems occurred all over again. And then in a sort of an exposed moment when he wasn't really thinking about it, when I was actually saying, so what is this? He just said, but I can't get it wrong. My whole career depends on getting it right. And then I realized that what was happening was that the associations with being at a certain standard and being good and having a career was actually tensing this guy up. And obviously those little tiny things, if they carry on for a long time, can build up into something much bigger. A bullying teacher, parent figure or conductor can trigger the inner critic, which can also trigger physical tension. Tensing up is a way of protecting yourself under real or imagined threat of attack. such as feeling you're being judged or criticised. Or it can come from your own inner critic kicking off and giving you a really tough time. Musicians are fantastic at hiding tension. It can often be barely noticeable to somebody looking in from the outside. And I've seen many players look extremely free, but actually on a very subtle level are holding an enormous amount of tension. The tension might just show up in an inability to play difficult passages or small areas, but it's these small tightenings over a long period that can lead to a bigger problem. Fight, flight or freeze response. What I've discovered is that in the fight-flight response that we all know, musicians don't tend to do either fight or flight. Nobody wants to fight a conductor. Nobody wants to run from the stage in terror. It's just not socially or musically or professionally acceptable. But musicians can freeze, and I think this happens a lot. Performance anxiety and a lot of stress can show itself in musicians as a freeze, a way of tensing up to protect against the fear of performing. Just as a thought with that, breathing is a brilliant way to start letting the anxiety ease and for the body to become less tense and held. And this is something I've noticed as well. It's the fear of making mistakes that can cause long-term chronic tension. I've seen so many musicians just so anxious to do something well that what they do is they tighten right up, and then they actually can't execute the passage they want to execute, and they're giving themselves a lot of tension. Whereas if they can let go and relax and allow themselves to make mistakes, just to learn what they need to do and what movement they need, then they can find the accuracy later, and it will actually help enormously to stave off the long-term chronic tension. So, what to do next? First, identify what's caused your pain. Is the pain recent, and could it be temporary? Or is it long-term and chronic? Is it related to playing the instrument, or is it something physical aside from playing the instrument? Or could the underlying cause be connected to something psychological and emotional? So, some choices. If you're a student, the first port of call really is to discuss it with your teacher. Teachers can be an enormous source of wisdom. They might have had problems themselves, or might have some ideas of what you can do. They might have a favourite practitioner that they swear by who may be able to help. Then there's the medical route. The first port of call again in the medical route is to go to your GP. Now, GPs are used to treating symptoms only. They're not going to be digging down for the cause to find out the emotional, psychological, physical reasons particular to you and your instrument for why you've got the problem that you have. What they're likely to do is to recommend anti-inflammatories if you've got tendinitis, for example, sometimes cortisone injections, and generally they'll say just rest, which is all fine and good, but if you rest tendinitis for 6 weeks, for example, to allow the tendons to just calm themselves, you still have to go back and play the instrument afterwards. So you really do need to know what's at the bottom of it to be able to really get yourself fully well. The GP can also refer you to a specialist. Now, the specialist is a specialist because they specialise in one part of the body. Again, like the GP, they don't necessarily connect it to the big picture, the physical, psychological, emotional reasons why you may have the issue you might have. But they can be very helpful nevertheless. So it's something to think about. Surgery. Surgery, I would say, is an absolute last resort because however fantastic and skilled surgeons are, and there are loads of them out there who are, what you're going to be dealing with, whatever the issue is going to be very, very subtle, and it needs a really superlative surgeon to deal with delicate, subtle things that are going to be very important to you, your instrument, your livelihood, etc. And then, of course, there's BAPAM, and BAPAM is a fantastic first step if you're dealing with injury of any sort. They have an enormous array of practitioners of all sorts, and it's worth giving them a call and just checking out what they have to offer. Bodywork techniques. The first thing you can think about is massage. But massage is fantastic for releasing tension, physical tension, but what it's not good for is when you have inflamed tendons. It really can aggravate somebody who's got tendonitis. Then you've got a whole array of other things. You've got osteopathy, chiropractic work, craniosacral. There's so much. And it's just worth sort of exploring and seeing what sort of appeals to you, what other people say, what you have recommended, etc. There's also obviously Alexander technique, which is very much something that a technique that musicians know about. And Alexander technique can give you insights as to why the injury has arisen, and also, of course, it's very, very helpful to learn good body habits and can prevent problems from arising in the future. There are other different types of bodywork techniques. There's also Feldenkrais. Feldenkrais is difficult to explain really, but it has similarities to Alexander technique, but it's much more balancing out the two different sides of the body. It's the whole body. Check it out and just see what you think about it. Tai Chi as well. I remember at the Guildhall they used to have Tai Chi, they probably still do, and that was really very helpful in terms of, again, building good physical body awareness. And then there's yoga. Any one of them might be of interest, and it's worth just sort of giving them a quick check. The key is to look after yourself. The first step, I would say, is do your research and check out just sort of see what you see, is find things out online, check things out, talk to people and see what will help you. Follow your gut instincts. You probably know what's best for you on some level, so it's worth just really listening to what your inner voice and your feelings are saying. Build your self-awareness physically and emotionally. This is one of the sort of most valuable things that can come out of aches, pains and an injury, is that you become very self-aware. You can learn a lot about yourself physically and also emotionally from having this experience. Take responsibility for any aches and pains you have. It's very easy to blame it on something else, but if you can take responsibility and just say, okay, I'm going to deal with this, I'm going to just, see where it goes and see what happens, that can really help. It is, after all, a holistic approach, and it needs to be a holistic approach. So the physical side, just to recap, if you can consider misuse and overuse. Are you practicing too long but with something that's slightly causing a niggle, that's causing a problem? Is it something aside from your instrument? Have you started slouching at the computer? Have you started getting really tense in traffic when you're driving, or any other thing along those lines? Encourage yourself to be very bodily aware so that you are really tuning in to what might be the issue at the bottom of what you're dealing with. Or is it emotional or psychological? There are so many pressures in the music profession and in just studying music as well as a student. So many pressures, and it's worth actually sort of looking at them and seeing what the problems could be. Is there some bullying figure outside of you that is making you feel sort of really uncomfortable, or are you beating yourself up and giving yourself a really tough time? Are you really anxious when you perform, and are you sort of tensing right up? Or are you really anxious about making mistakes and want to be a perfectionist and want to get it so right that you're really giving yourself a lot of tension and physical problems? It's really worth saying here that if you can identify the core issue, then the physical has a chance to heal. If you look at just the physical, very often you might treat the symptoms, but everything might come back again. But if you can get to the bottom of it, if you can really figure out what it is that might be causing the problem, then you have a very good chance of getting things better. And last but not least, what we really want to do is to prevent anything from happening in the first place. So that actually is the end of the presentation. I'm now going to put online a series of useful resources. Just quickly sort of lead you through these. A lot of these are connected to performance anxiety because I do a lot of work with people on this. There are a whole series of free video interviews with top international musicians on a website called beyondstagefright.com. There are about 42 of them, in fact. Very, very interesting, some really fascinating people. There's a free 5-day course to manage your nerves on the website beyondstagefrightacademy.com. If you're interested in having individual performance coaching sessions with me, you're very welcome to email me at info@charlottetomlinson.com. And if you'd like to order my book, Music from the Inside Out, which deals with all of these issues, just go to my website and you'll find the links there, charlottetomlinson.com. So now what's going to happen next is that I see a whole load of questions coming up on the screen, and I'm going to be, there might be a little bit of silence whilst I read them, and then I'm going to read some out and answer them as best I can. So let's go. So do be patient if there is a sort of 20-second silence. It's just me reading. Okay, so Claire, I was told that I have had overuse syndrome, RSI. I've also been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. How do you tell the difference between the two? Having been put on the input pain management program at St. Thomas's, we were told with chronic pain there isn't any cure. Medication will only do so much, so I'm now not on any. My problem is I was told by a professional before being diagnosed with fibromyalgia that I should stop playing the cello. I was told it would do permanent damage to myself by continuing to play, so I did. The problem is I now can't get back to playing the cello. Well, this is tricky. I'm a patient at the Musicians and Performing Arts Clinic at St. Thomas's, but no one has been able to give me a program to follow of how to get back to playing the standard I was and being able to perform in orchestras. Claire, this is really tricky, and I think that this is something we'll need longer than the sort of few minutes that we've got on here. But all I want to say is I do understand what fibromyalgia is. It's a lot of unexplained pain, and I can see that RSI and all the performance-related injury can overlap with fibromyalgia. It's tricky, and it would need to be sort of, in a way, sort of untangled. So I can't give you an instant answer here, but I would love to sort of discuss this with you more and really sort of see whether I can help you get to the bottom of it. But I'm sure that you can get back to playing at a standard that you were. I think it's so tricky because if you're medical, you don't want to give people too much hope. And a lot of things with fibromyalgia is people don't really know what it is and how to answer it. So it does need a much deeper approach to look at it. So I'm going to put that on hold, as it were. So do please contact me. We'll sort of on charlottetomlinson.com, and I'd be very, very happy to talk to you and possibly work with you. Okay, next question. Lauren has said, I've had RSI in both arms. I'm a violinist since September, and I just don't know how to get back to playing properly. How should I make a plan? I find that when playing the piano, I'm playing pieces that involve... Oh, that's a separate one. Beg your pardon. That's my mistake. Okay, how should I make a plan? Yes. Well, there are various things that you can do, Lauren. You could... It's so tricky because I just want to sort of see what you're doing, and then I could actually see what's happening. It's really hard for me to answer generically. I would say something is going on. There will be some form of tension. There'll be some form, possibly a form of anxiety going on. I think you need to find out what's at the bottom of it. And once you get a sense of that, a lot of detective work needs to go on. Once you get a sense of that, then a plan can emerge. Oh gosh, it sounds as if I'm not giving you answers that you want, but it's really tricky if it's so individual like this. But I hope that gives some indication. Again, you're more than welcome to make contact, and I can kind of dig down deeper and help you as much as I possibly can. Okay, Beth. Let's just have a look. Beth, I find that when playing the piano and playing pieces that involve stretching lots of octaves, that my hands swell and are incredibly painful. I've had CT scans and there's no arthritis, so I'm a little vexed why this is happening. I'm only 45 too. Beth, I would say, as a pianist, I know what happens when people do octaves, and my guess, again without seeing you, is what you're doing is you're locking your entire hand up when you're stretching, and that hand is then being locked in position and you're doing octaves from that position of chronic tension. Again, without being able to demonstrate, I would just say you need to be able to learn, and the other thing is you're probably really tightening your wrist. I would say you're locking your wrist, possibly locking your elbow, locking your shoulders, but there'll be lots of locking that's going on. And then start bringing in some freedom in your wrist, or rather at least checking to see whether you're tightening your wrist. Maybe that's the problem. But you need to learn how to let go after you've been doing anything that involves tightening up. So it won't be, I really doubt it's arthritis. I don't know why your hands are swelling, but I think it's, or I can't say, but I would suspect it's to do with tension and what you're actually doing. Okay, Linda has said, do I recommend Pilates? Well, if it works, why not? I think these things are so personal. If you try it out, see whether it helps you. I know some people who swear by Pilates. Anything that will actually give you greater physical awareness can only be helpful. I think the thing that we forget as musicians is that we are actually fine motor control athletes, and we tend to forget that we need to sort of look after our bodies and get to know how we function physically. And you know, I mean, the athletes, people in the sports community think about this a lot. But we tend to forget that. Any more questions? If there are, go for it. And otherwise, okay, we're going to wait. Oh, yes, there is something. There is something that's popped up. Hang on, that's Beth. Oh, yes, same Beth. Beth, I have small hands, so playing octaves is hard. Yes, I completely get that. So yes, I am certainly locking my hands to a full stretch. Are there any techniques to reaching octaves with small hands? Yes, you have to free up between the stretch. That's the key. That's what's happening. I've got small hands as well, so I really get it. It's the fact that you're sustaining that lock that's causing the problems, Beth, and you need to find ways of letting go and releasing the tension in between. Okay, we've got another one. What can teachers best do to manage performance anxiety in pupils, especially adult learners? Haha, yes, it's slightly off topic, but it's also very connected. So this is from David. Yes, David, I would say adults are a classic for performance anxiety because they're very self-conscious, and it's usually something new and different, and they haven't built up their sort of performing resilience since they were a child. So yeah, again, a long one, but breathing is fantastic. It sounds so simplistic, but actually getting somebody to breathe when they're practicing and also to then start building it in to performance can be very helpful. I tend to find that people know about breathing, but they don't actually do it. They go, oh yes, that's a good idea. But to actually get people to start breathing when they're playing in lessons, when they're practicing, then they that becomes quite normal for them. They build it into a habit, and then when they're going out on stage, they don't lock as much, and that can really help with performance anxiety, locking down, and all of those things. Michael, I'm a guitar teacher and a music student, and I suffer from tendinitis that keeps disappearing and reappearing. I wonder how I should prevent myself from imagining the pain. I wonder if the condition stems from a fear of tendinitis reoccurring again. Could well do. It could well do. I mean, I think there'll be a combination of things happening there, Michael. There'll be, if it's disappearing and reappearing, I would imagine that sometimes you let go of the tension or let go of whatever the emotions are behind it, and sometimes you aggravate them. And yes, I mean, we are... the body-mind connection is very, very strong. So if you are imagining it coming back again, or worried about it coming back again, then yes, it's very likely that it is coming back again. Rosemary, do you recommend a maximum numbers of hours practice, especially if one is playing a number of instruments? No, I don't. I don't agree actually with a certain standard amount. I think it's very important that you practice when you're fresh. You practice for as long as you're fresh. When you start getting bored, restless, tired, you have a break. You come back again, make sure you're fresh, etc. You have to work something out from a very personal perspective. And for somebody to say you have to do 4 hours, you have to do this amount or whatever, I think is a little bit arbitrary. It has to be personal. Donata, am I saying your name right? I hope so. I'm a 24-year-old pianist, and for more than 7 years I've got a pain and lump in my wrist from time to time. It comes and goes and it's very painful. Doctors thought it was a ganglion. I worked a lot with my teachers to release any tension, but it kept happening from time to time. Is it possible that once it happens, it's almost impossible to get rid of it for good? Well, that's really interesting. I'm the daughter of 2 GPs, and I remember having a ganglion when I was a child, and the standard, rather hilarious thinking about it now, the standard advice that's gone down through the generations of doctors has been hit it with a family Bible, which is completely daft. The family Bible would have been extremely heavy. So the advice from, centuries ago was to whack it, and it will probably go. But I don't think that's very good advice. So what I would say is I just wouldn't worry about it. I know it's painful, but I've had it. Other people have had it. It can go. I don't know how it goes. I don't know why it goes. But I do think that when we get worried and anxious about things, it actually keeps it there more than otherwise. Okay, Lauren again. I know what happened to cause the RSI and it is healing. In order to build up strength, etc., should I build up in time, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or concentrate on exercises away from the violin? Wrists are the worst for trying to strengthen. Do you need to strengthen your wrists, Lauren? I mean, I don't know that strengthening is actually the right word to use, because that can imply a tension. I would say it's not a case of 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's a case of how long it feels right. So when you're building up your ability to, it's great that it's healing, by the way, when you're building up your ability to play until you feel the niggle that says it's not quite right, and then stop, rather than an arbitrary amount of time. Okay, right, let's just see. So we've got, let's just see, okay. This is not so much a question, hang on a second, I missed that one. This is not so much a question, but rather a comment on the problem of doctors treating symptoms rather than taking a more holistic approach. I'm a pianist and recently had surgery for shoulder bursitis, right shoulder. 4 years ago, I had surgery on my left shoulder to deal with bone spurs that were rubbing on the tendon under the acromion. I hope I've said that right. With the left shoulder, it took almost 18 months for the doctors to diagnose the problem. As a result, I got referred numbness as well as pins and needles going into my arm and hand. It was incredibly frustrating that the doctors didn't see the big picture and realised that the numbness was connected to the shoulder problem. I think, yeah, that is the case. Doctors aren't trained to see the big picture, and they're not trained to see and think about things holistically. It's not the way things work. Sometimes they do, and that's fantastic, but it means that we have to do that. If the doctors don't do it, we have to do it. So sometimes going to a different alternative health practitioner might be helpful in this kind of case, although obviously you're talking about money and all of that. So okay. Eric, I'm a guitar teacher. I suffer from trigger fingers due to overuse and RSI. I've seen a medical specialist and went through a series of hand therapy. The last resort recommended by the medical specialist is go to surgery. I'm not too sure whether I should consider this option. Blimey, no, I wouldn't. But I don't know, Eric, I don't know exactly what you're dealing with. I mean, my automatic response would be treat surgery absolutely as the last resort, because if it's overuse and RSI, there'll be something that you're doing that's not working, and there'll be tension, you'll be locking in your shoulders or your elbows or your wrists or your fingers. There'll be something going on. But if you go to surgery, you could cause more problems. I'd be very, very careful about doing that as the first step. Michael, do you think that asking a GP for mild antidepressants could be a good way to overcome the fear of the condition reappearing? Personally, I wouldn't, but then I would actually, I mean, I'm sort of much more a believer in sort of listening to your emotions and your feelings than going towards the medication, because I think antidepressants can bring up all sorts of other sort of issues. I would deal with your fear of the condition reappearing and just be really kind to yourself and soothe yourself and say that very strong likelihood is that it won't. It has, I mean, you say it comes and it goes, well, it goes. So focus on the going of it, focus on when it's not there, and you'll probably find that it just won't come back. I would do that much more than go to and get antidepressants. Okay, well, I think that's it for the questions. If anybody wants to ask a last question, we've got another 30 seconds or so for you to kind of write in. Oh, yes, oh, we have got another one. Okay, here we go. Now, forgive me if I can't say your name right. Hewitt. I have a problem with raising shoulders, especially the right shoulder when I play the harp, mainly when I play difficult passages. I also have a problem with twisting my back. I suffer from constant shoulder muscle problems for years. It comes and goes. What should I do? Give me a call. I mean, it's one of those things where you just need somebody. It doesn't have to be me. There are other people who can help you, I'm sure, who just can see what you're doing. I mean, you're obviously very aware of what you're doing, but you need somebody to help you to free up within those areas so that you can play the harp with freedom. Knowing about it is the first step, but actually being able to be free when you play is the next step. So finding somebody who can do that for you would be the best thing, I would say. Great. Okay. Well, we're going to call this a day now, and thank you so much for all your questions. And I'm sorry I can't actually see you all. It'd be really lovely if I could, but this is the way webinars work. And thank you for listening. And just to remind you again that this recording is going to be on the website. So if you want to hear it again, or you know somebody who might be interested, just direct them to ism.org/webinars. Thanks very much.